Welcome to Cybersecurity Today. This is the Week in Review for the week ending Friday, June 7th, 2024. I'm Howard Solomon, contributing reporter on cybersecurity for TechNewsDay.com. With me this week is guest commentator David Shipley of Beauceron Security. We'll be talking about the data breaches at a cloud storage and analytics provider called Snowflake, an Auditor General report critical of Canada's cybercrime-fighting agencies, and the continuing debate on Microsoft's new recall tool. But first, a look at some of the headlines from the past 7 days. Application developers using the on-premise version of Kayuan SAST for source code analysis should install the latest security update immediately. Researchers at SEC Consult say the application has multiple vulnerabilities. The cloud version was patched in February. What's worrisome is that the vulnerabilities were identified and the vendor warned almost 2 years ago. When the FBI and other law enforcement agencies struck the Lockbit ransomware gang in February, they got a bonus: over 7,000 keys that can unscramble the data that the gang encrypted. According to Security Week, an FBI official told that to attendees at a Boston cybersecurity conference this week. If your firm has been hit by the Lockbit ransomware strain, contact your local police department for advice. The U.S. Justice Department is trying to get back most of the $6.4 million a union was defrauded out of in an email scam. The employee fell for the spoofed email that appeared to come from the union's investment manager. The message asked the union to change the bank it usually sent payments to. The account the money went to was really controlled by a crook. The money allegedly was laundered and traced to 7 accounts in Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Nigeria. The gang distributing the new Ransom Hub ransomware strain has probably adapted the Night ransomware code. That's according to researchers at Symantec, who note the two codes are very similar. The source code for Night was offered for sale in February and could have been bought then. Ransom Hub emerged the same month. This gang has attracted some large former affiliates of the Alpha V Black Cat ransomware gang, which closed earlier this year. In another example of there's no honor among thieves, the Chinese online shopping platform PandaBuy has admitted it was recently hit twice by the same extortion gang. The Chinese firm told the Bleeping Computer news site the first time it paid a ransom to prevent the stolen data from being leaked or sold on the dark web. However, this week, the same threat actor put up for sale what they claimed was more data stolen from PandaBuy. And finally, Panorama Eye Care, an American firm that provides management services to eye clinics, is notifying almost 378,000 Americans of a data theft. The company told Maine's Attorney General's office that last May, a hacker got into its IT network and copied information, including customers' names, credit card numbers, and more. Joining me this week from Vienna is David Shipley. Hi there, and what are you doing in Austria?
I nothing work related. It has entirely been an amazing time with family and vacation, and it's an absolute gem of a city. It's been fantastic. I don't think my resting heart rate has improved this much in years. It's awesome.
Okay, great. Let's get right to it. Topic 1, a blizzard of controversy around Snowflake. Snowflake is an American-based cloud storage and analytics service used by big companies, including MasterCard, Honeywell, and the Albertsons supermarket chain. Last week, it acknowledged a targeted threat campaign against some Snowflake customer accounts. Australia's cybersecurity agency confirmed this, saying it's aware of successful compromises of several companies using Snowflake. At the same time, Ticketmaster acknowledged a huge data theft from an unnamed third-party cloud database that it uses. Some news outlets think that it was Snowflake, although one cybersecurity researcher it spoke to the supposed hackers, and they said the data came from an AWS instance. In addition, the Spanish bank Santander said customers of the bank in Spain, Chile, and Uruguay was stolen from what it called a cloud-based platform that it uses. And again, some cyber news media think that this was a theft from Snowflake. Regardless of who was hit, Snowflake and its investigation team, who include CrowdStrike and Mandiant, say any activity was not the result of a breach of Snowflake's platform or a vulnerability or a misconfiguration of compromised staff credentials. Snowflake does say that threat actors are leveraging stolen credentials and are targeting users that only use single-factor authentication. So, David, it seems what we have here is blame those who aren't using multi-factor authentication.
So this story continues to get more and more complicated and convoluted, with conflicting information from the company, a cybersecurity company that commented on the breach, and then withdrawing it, posts by national cybersecurity agencies, and more. This breach, if it is a single vendor that these multiple companies are all attached to, has the potential to blow the MoveIt breach of 2023 fame out of the water for sheer size of impacted users. And we'll have to see if the quality, and I say that in air quotes, of the breach data rises to the same level of harm as MoveIt. Either way, this is not a milestone we particularly want to have for 2024. And I'm prepared today to call the year 5 months in as already significantly worse than 2023 because of this. When we think about United Health, Medisecure in Australia, London Drugs in Canada, and so much more. All of this comes at a time when many companies have cut cybersecurity spending and staffing. Meanwhile, we have a third major confirmed breach that's of the same scale as Ticketmaster announced this week, with up to 400 million customers potentially impacted. Advance Auto Parts, one of the world's largest auto part companies, was named in a breach posting according to reporting from Bleeping Computer. Now, Advance operates 4,777 stores and 320 WorldPack branches, and also serves 1,152 independently owned CarQuest stores in the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Mexico, and various Caribbean islands. The stolen data allegedly include 380 million customer profiles, name, email, phone, address, and more, $140 million customer orders, 44 million loyalty gas card numbers, that could hurt, auto parts, part numbers, not really seeing the harm there, sales history, employment candidate with SSNs, driver's license numbers, and demographic details, aka identity theft jackpot, and transaction tender details.
Security researcher Kevin Beaumont believes the Snowflake hackers are a teen crime wave group that's been active on the Telegram messaging site.
Well, Kevin's a pretty smart guy. I follow a lot of what he posts, and the involvement of a teenage crimeware group matches a disturbing pattern we've seen in the past few years with the rise of groups like Scattered Spider. It's interesting to note that in the screenshot of the Advanced Auto Parts breach notice, the criminal user profile icon is a spider. Now, that's hardly a smoking gun, but it's, I would say, arguably interesting circumstantial evidence nonetheless. I know this issue of teenagers getting involved in crime is a huge issue for global law enforcement, and they're deeply worried about it. And they're trying to combat it. And we saw that in the worldwide effort to target users of the Genesis marketplace, including a successful door-knocking campaign here in Canada that was designed to steer folks away from a bad path in life, as well as to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, chef's kiss, to the criminal community, which was awesome.
Interestingly, according to the Bleeping Computer news service, a cybersecurity company claimed that it spoke to the threat actor who is taking credit for the Santander and Ticketmaster thefts through a Snowflake employee's account using stolen credentials. After Snowflake denied that an employee's account with access to customer data was hacked, the cybersecurity company withdrew its report. Snowflake did say that a hacker got credentials of a former employee and they accessed demo accounts. But those accounts didn't have sensitive data, Snowflake said.
And apparently, it wasn't just the company denied it to the other cybersecurity firm that kind of posted a blog and reported on this. They also had a legal threat, allegedly, according to the company. And that's interesting. And I do want to point out, just for a second, Snowflake is having an absolute, very bad, awful week because it's damned if it did, it's damned if it didn't. Even if everything comes up aces and they did everything right, their name is just getting drugged through all of this. And I can only imagine how much this really sucks for their entire team. So I just want to take a moment of empathy and just say this has got to be gut wrenching for them.
One thing for sure, the Ticketmaster hack was huge. Data on over 500 million customers was copied. What does this say about this organization's preparations for a data theft?
I think we're really going to need to see what comes out of any future SEC filings, because Ticketmaster is a publicly traded company. I deeply hope the U.S. Cybersecurity Review Board is girding up to dive into this with a report as thorough as it did for the Microsoft breach report for the attack by China. Lastly, let's not forget this dataset wasn't just sitting in some poorly secured AWS S3 bucket, unless, caveat, it was. But so far, all evidence seems to be pointing at Snowflake. And boy, AWS must be glad that the bad news it's had for the past few years is now popping up for other providers. It was a platform that offered both storage, Snowflake does, and the siren song of so-called AI-powered insights. And I think as companies rush to embrace generative AI and the temptations to be data pack rats continues to grow, and obviously I have strong feelings about questionable value of zombie data, we are actually going to see more of this. So as people data hoard and they think that they can extract future value from the data and they put it in these platforms and running all this AI on it, they are also setting themselves up for a very bad day if they have a single point of failure.
Let's move on. Topic 2, Canada's Auditor General slams the ability of this country's cybercrime-fighting agencies to help victims. In a report this week, the Auditor General found there were breakdowns in response to citizen complaints, in coordination between agencies, in tracking of cyber incidents, and more. We're talking here about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, which operates the new National Cybercrime Coordination Centre, the Communications Security Establishment, which is Canada's counterpart to the U.S. National Security Agency, and the CRTC, which is the broadcast regulator that's responsible for enforcing our anti-spam legislation. The Auditor General says that these agencies don't have the capacity and the tools to fulfill their mandates to protect Canadians from cyber attacks. One big problem, businesses know where to report cybercrime. Individuals don't. If an individual reports an incident to the CSE, it tells people they have to go to another body instead of the CSE forwarding the report itself. The RCMP, the Communications Security Establishment, and Public Safety Canada have discussed creating a single place for individuals to report cybercrime, but they haven't got past talking about it. Another problem, as of January, the RCMP was having trouble hiring cybersecurity investigators. David, what stood out to you in this report?
Obviously, as someone who's been saying a lot of this for the past 7 years, I wasn't terribly surprised by the Auditor General's report. What I have, however, learned over the past few years working at the national level on these issues is that, number one, we lack a clear, coherent, updated national cybersecurity strategy, not just a federal one, that has a greater clarity on who at the cabinet level is actually the lead for cyber and how we're going to make it simpler for everyday Canadians and Canadian businesses to get the help that they need. I think the first damning insight from this report is the ball drop on a child sex exploitation case between the CRTC and the RCMP. And it's a perfect example of the CRTC needing to get out of this business. We need to wind down the CRTC's role in cybercrime, specifically the role it was given under the Canadian anti-spam legislation, and transfer it to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which, as a collaboration between CSC and the RCMP, is better equipped to handle this. We need to follow Australia's example. When we look at Australia, they have a single full cabinet minister, Claire O'Neill, who's responsible for cybersecurity and coordinating across various agencies and ministries. The Cyber Centre, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, ideally should fall under this minister. The Cyber Centre should be the single point of contact for Canadian businesses and individuals impacted by all forms of cyber attack, whether it's destructive attacks, attacking critical infrastructure, criminal attack with extortion or ransomware, espionage, or cyber-enabled fraud. This would enable the proper funneling to appropriate agencies with better visibilities into the problem and data collection. This idea of a minister for cybersecurity is a coordinating role and could coordinate with those stakeholders who would continue to hold a piece of the puzzle, whether it's the Minister of Public Safety, Minister of National Defense, Minister of Global Affairs, Minister for ISED, or even the Minister responsible for Natural Resources Canada for some aspects of critical infrastructure or transport. And by implementing a new updated strategy, we'd also help execute on that strategy, do the legislative and regulatory and policy changes, as well as coordinating offensive responses, not just the defensive responses, including offensive work by law enforcement, military, and diplomatic responses. For God's sakes, this is not rocket science. Australia has already done it. We need to set aside the past, what has been done, and get serious about protecting our future and getting out of this miserable present state of affairs.
What struck me in the report was that the RCMP had poor cybersecurity reporting, records management, and a lack of quality data, which the Auditor General says impairs the force's ability to understand the full picture of cybercrime cases that are reported in Canada to its cybercrime unit. And it also has trouble keeping track of specific cases assigned to the unit for investigation. And I don't know, you don't need to have a unified ministry of cybersecurity for you to recognize this. Does this suggest that the RCMP doesn't take cybercrime seriously?
No, absolutely not. I've mentioned before on past podcasts that I have had the chance to get to know some very senior leaders in the RCMP, and I've had some really meaningful conversations. I know that the RCMP care about these issues, but they are woefully and absolutely inadequately resourced to the escalating challenge they face. Keep in mind that in the federal 2018 budget, the scale of cybercrime that was being reported in cyber-enabled fraud was about $100 million. Today, it's $600 million reported. It's a massive six-fold increase in what's going on in the world. Meanwhile, the RCMP haven't been given a new dollar for cyber since 2018. I'm not even going to beat up the political leaders, though, too much today, because the sheer pace of this thing is outpacing even the good intentions that they had in 2018. We are in a crisis. It's time to treat it that way, and we need to see the cyber story as part of a larger issue in this country around the strategic threat of cyber at the national security level, and alongside foreign interference and intensifying international conflict, the fact that we live in a much more hostile world. We need to wake up before it's too late.
The RCMP got almost $70 million for an IT system to help track and analyze cybercrime data. It was supposed to be implemented last March, but it's been delayed 2 years.
I think this is hardly a unique problem for the RCMP. When they're trying to do anything in large enterprise IT, in companies, in the private sector, and in particular the federal government, is really hard. And these type of IT projects going off the rails isn't generally due to the technology itself. It's usually a toxic combination of broken procurement process, high, lowest bidder, and lack of leadership at the most senior levels, including the political level. I'd say a clear message to Canadians as a caution also is the current toxic political environment around ArriveCan is also increasingly paralyzing IT issues federally. But setting aside the data side, I don't even think that's the biggest problem swamping police right now. With the inadequate level of resources that they have, and the fact that they just keep jumping from fire to fire rather than having the ability to follow something through and really go at these gangs, which we look at Genesis Market, take years of consistent policing effort, then you see the challenge is just almost to the point of being unmanageable.
Another thing that the report points out is the CRTC, which is the broadcast regulator charged with enforcing Canada's anti-spam legislation, seems to be a bit shy. At one point, when a police department learned that the regulator had seized computers of an alleged offender, a police department got a warrant to get its hands on that data for a criminal investigation. But rather than hand over the devices or the information that it had to police, the CRTC got permission of the owner to delete the data and then told the police department, we no longer have the data that you want.
Yeah, it's time to fire the CRTC from this role. They have enough on their plate and should be focused on issues around telecommunications policy. We need to treat malicious and abusive anti spammers in the criminal code and have policing agencies who are properly trained to deal with criminal activity, investigate it, and put together prosecutable cases to the Crown, deal with that. We have so botched the Canadian anti spam legislation. We have to fix it. We have to focus it so it actually does some good. And it needs to be in the hands of agencies that can execute it properly.
One thing to make clear, this was not a report on the effectiveness of Canadian government agencies, such as the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, on advising organizations and individuals on their roles in cyber attack prevention.
Absolutely. And I have had the opportunity to get to know some of the senior leaders at CSC and at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. They and their teams are top tier, and we do hold our own at the global level. But they face the same staffing challenges for skilled talent that we all do in cybersecurity. And I do think that there's ways that we could be better working together as the public and the private sector, both with improved information sharing, but also collaboratively sharing resources to do it. I do think we've got the right players and the foundational pieces at the national level, but we need a better and a clarified head coach, for lack of a better analogy, and an understanding of who are the assistant coaches. So this is my point about the cyber minister helping coordinate among the other ministries, not to mention the intergovernmental aspects at the provincial level. One thing I have as a worry, as a deep concern that is not in the Auditor General report because it only came through in the newly announced federal enterprise IT strategy, cybersecurity strategy rather, is that the federal government's going to place even more work on protecting itself, the Canadian government, on the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which was mandated to help outside of government without increasing resources needed for them. And that just seemed like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think it's going to break what the Auditor General has rightly said is working. So they're just going to make it worse.
Okay, final news topic. Will Microsoft recall? The debate still rages on whether Microsoft's new Windows recall tool is a cybersecurity and privacy risk. Recall is a Windows 11 tool that's going to be launched June 18th. And it takes snapshots every 5 seconds of employees' screens. The images are stored on each user's PC, and then employees can use AI to search the stored data. Terry Cutler and I discussed the pros and cons of this last week, but an article this week on Wired.com continues the debate. A security researcher found that on a test computer, Restore stores its snapshot data unencrypted, which is against what Microsoft promised, at least in preview versions. Another researcher has released a tool, he says, that can automatically extract everything Recall records that isn't encrypted. The news site Ars Technica says running Recall in a test environment, a user can access someone else's Recall data store, which Microsoft says isn't supposed to be done. Two things to remember. All tests so far have been done on non-approved Windows devices. Microsoft says that when officially launched, Recall will only run on PCs powered by Snapdragon processors, and these PCs will also be branded Copilot Plus. Microsoft is trying to work with Intel and AMD to get Recall license for those machines, but the Snapdragon PCs are only just being introduced. They won't be in business environments immediately. The other thing to remember, of course, is Microsoft's website says Recall's data store is protected with data encryption. But David, the Ars Technica and Wired articles throw more skepticism on this tool.
Absolutely. Andrew Cunningham wrote for a spot-on opinion piece in Ars Technica that absolutely nails the core issue here. Here's the headline, quote, Windows Recall demands an extraordinary level of trust that Microsoft hasn't earned, period. I agree. I'm frankly stunned that they've gone ahead and released this to the hype that they have. I think they've undermined all of their post cybersecurity review board messaging about how they're changing their security culture, putting security ahead of product, and they're on a new path. I want to be clear, for me, there is no debate about Recall. This is a massive cybersecurity and privacy risk. Wired's piece eviscerated, and I use that word purposefully, the marketing speak security assurances that have been provided, and what is likely, the example you mentioned, the first of what will be many real-world toolkits used by criminals and researchers. In this case, this one's called Total Recall. Now, to be clear, I do appreciate Microsoft as a company. I think it's done some amazing things, both technologically and with the work like Brad Smith's advocacy on global cybersecurity norm, or with the help in Ukraine in its online war with Russia. But they have to recall this feature. The supposed productivity and convenience gains don't come close to the now proven security and privacy issues before this thing has even hit the streets.
Assume for the moment that the preview version that these researchers are working on doesn't have encryption turned on, but the full version, when it comes out after June 18th, will. Does that reassure you?
Not even close. From what researchers are saying so far is that they believe the encryption that Microsoft is promoting is BitLocker, which is great when the threat model is someone getting access to your device and physically trying to get it off of the hard drive. But the data, no matter what, that's being stored here, and let's be really clear, it's being stored on the device, has to be decrypted at various points to be processed and used. And you simply need to find holes in the processes that do that to abuse this data. Sometimes the only way to be safe in IT, in cybersecurity, is not do something. And I will never own a device that takes screenshots. And yes, despite the clever marketing speak that talk about snapshots, they are screenshots every 5 seconds that can store up to a year's worth of everything I do on a device. Hell no. And let me be blunt, this feature has the potential to undo decades worth of progress in securing devices from software flaws and malicious actor and malware. This is a huge leap backward if we are so silly as to do it.
Well, Microsoft says in addition to encryption, there's other protections. A user needs administrator privileges to access the Recall data store, and Windows administrators can turn Recall off.
So far, it's proven way too hard to turn off and should be turned off by default. And as for administrative privileges, are you kidding me? We can't even get a handle on local admin and administrative privileges properly in enterprise environments with IT teams still. And we think that's going to keep people safe at the personal compute level or the small and mid-sized business level. That is not even close to be good enough. The reality is they can spray all the perfume they want on this AI turd, but it's still going to stink.
So is this a growing problem for Microsoft, or is this a wait and see what finally ships?
I think Honestly, if they don't pull this feature soon, sooner or later, the US Congress or Senate, and they have some senators who are absolutely gunning for Microsoft right now, they're going to realize the risk this tool could pose to their political campaign machine and personal devices, which, by the way, are not managed by government. They're going to lose their minds. That's a much bigger hearing Microsoft does not want to have. I'd love to say we'd see something similar here in Canada, but given that we can't even deal with the bigger issues like MPs apparently working for foreign governments to the detriment of Canada for their own personal benefit, aka Tradergate, I'm pretty skeptical.
That's it for this week's edition. Thanks very much for being with us, David.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, have a safe trip back to New Brunswick.
Absolutely.
Links to details about news mentioned in this podcast episode are in the text version at technewsday.com. Follow Cybersecurity Today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or add us to your flash briefing on your smart speaker. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. From Toronto, I'm Howard Solomon.